Hello beard lovers, I'm Brian's clone here to teach you a lesson. Today's lesson is how to take out the engine on a Subaru Outback. It's a Legacy, this one's a 98, this is a common one. These often have to have cylinder heads done and other stuff. It's easier if you just take the motor out. You can do the cylinder heads with the motor in, but with this special one that I'm doing, I'm going to be doing the whole motor, piston rings and everything, main bearings, you name it. It's got a bunch of rod bearings that are knocking. It ran out of oil. So anyway, this is my 5th Subaru. Personally, I own this one now, so this should be pretty fun. The first thing that I like to do is drain everything. You drain out the oil and the antifreeze. The antifreeze drain cock, as you're standing here, is down on this side. The radiator's gone now, but you drain the radiator from this side. I like to put a little hose on it, drain pan it, and then I unplug this electrical plug here for the fans on this side and the electrical plug here for the other side. Subaru plugs are kind of weird. You got to use your fingernail to undo them. Some of them, like the ones on the injectors, you just squeeze the tab on the back, but a lot of them you have to put your fingernail under it and pull it down and then pull on it at the same time. That's the way those are down there. So I pull out the radiator by pulling this bolt, and then you pull out this fastener. To do the fastener here, you just take a screwdriver and just pop, 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 and it comes up and out. And once you do that, this whole big bracket piece that you see laying here comes out. So you pull that out and then disconnect the transmission lines. One of them is done on the front up here, and then the other one's done down below. The one down below, I'm going to just show you everything up top first, and then I'll show you everything down below. This one's an automatic transmission, which means that you got to take the intake manifold off before you pull it out. And you got to do that in order to access the torque converter bolts that are accessible through this little hole back here. The intake assembly and air filter box I pulled off. It's just a 10mm bolt here and one here. I pull off the band that holds on the throttle body, and then just unbuckle these and pull the air filter out. The next thing I like to do is I'll undo all the wire harnesses. There's a bunch of them on a little bracket. Put it back in place so you can see it. There's a bracket here for all of the electrical connections that go to the cylinder heads. So you undo all of these and pull them out and lay them aside. I also like to pull the bracket off from those. I haven't done that yet, obviously, but you take these off from there also so that you can put the bracket back on, because that's what you hook onto for your cherry picker. Cherry picker hooks on right here, and then it also hooks on right here into this bracket. Once you get the radiator out, it's really easy to get all the rest of the bracket stuff out. There's a belt tensioner and a bunch of other stuff. To get all this, you have to loosen the bolt on the alternator right here. You have to pull out another little bolt that goes to a little bracket that's gone now here, and then there's another little bolt that goes on the end here. Here it is. It's over here now on the power steering pump. Once you loosen this bolt here and this one to take the bracket out, you can push the alternator down, unplug it, string the wire harness out, and then you're able to detension the belt for that. Throw that aside. Then you pull out the bolts. There's 5 bolts. There's 4 that hold the compressor onto the bracket, and then there's a 5th one that's straight down here. You want to pull that too. Once you pull those, unbuckle this, and then you'll be able to just pick it up and lay it aside. I just like to put it about like that. That does the trick. I pulled off the tensioner. The tensioner looks like this. You just loosen this bolt down here, nut down here at the bottom first, and then pull the bolts. And when you pull the bolts, you can just pull that out and set it aside. And then the next thing I like to do is go ahead and undo the power steering pump. You go through the pulley, and there's 3 bolts. They're just 12mm. They're on either side horizontally, and then one in the bottom. Once you do that, you can pull these other 2 bolts. They're a little 10mm one here and one here, and then this will set aside. Better watch the paint. My wife's going to probably wind up driving this. She wants it pretty, I'm sure. So anyway, you get all that stuff out of the way, and then I like to pull the starter. Pull it, the bottom nut on the starter, there's a little stud down here. The bottom one's a 17 millimeter, the top one's a long 14 millimeter. And it also holds in the ground cable for the negative battery cable. You pull those out, and then while you're in there, spray a little JB or PB blaster on this nut for the EGR. You'll need to pull that off to pull the intake off, because this goes down to the cylinder head, this little pipe. So I'll spray that, let it soak for a little bit, pull the starter out, and then come back to that and break it loose, and then you just bend it, you just flex it back just a little bit, enough to clear the intake manifold. The next thing I like to do is the bolts that hold the motor in. There's actually nuts. There's one that's down here. You can see the CV axle barely, but in front of the CV axle there's a little 14 millimeter nut. You want to pull that one out, and then on the other side there's another one, same story. It's a little easier to get to, but there's a nut down here on this side. There's basically 4 points that the motor's held in by. There's another long bolt here. You pull that out, and then your motor's free. And then for the intake manifold, I'm just going to do all the stuff up top first. At this point I would go underneath and do some stuff underneath, but that's just for variety. The next thing you want to do is you want to undo your crankshaft position sensor. This is a squeeze type, and just pull it off. And then also behind there, there's a coolant temperature sensor. You just undo it, it's just a blade connector. You pull that off. Pull off your spark plug wires and lay them aside. The firing order is real easy. The one that's in the front right goes to the front right, and the front left, back left, etc. They just go straight down onto their cylinders respectively. Next thing I do is I go with a 12 millimeter and an impact, and there's 4 bolts on each side of the intake. You hit them here, here and here, here and here, and also over here. Then you want to undo your fuel lines. You've got your 2 fuel lines here with those crazy hose clamps. I just pull the screws out of them and set them aside. They're easier to work with that way, and that way we don't lose the little washer off the end. They all like to fall apart and go bad places, like fall into the intake holes. It sucks. Anyway, you pull all that stuff out, you pull your heater hoses. Your heater hoses are just here and here, same kind of hose clamps, so you just get those out of the way. I just tuck mine up behind the bracket for the intake box, the air filter housing. Then you want to undo the hose, the vacuum hose for your power brake booster. You got all those bolts out of there. The next thing you want to do is your throttle cables. The way to do those, you have to undo the nut on the front side, and do this part first. Don't try to string them out of here until you undo the cables. You just undo the 12 millimeter open end wrench, just zip them down, and then they've got a little part at the end of them that will feed through that bracket. You see how there's no threads on this portion right here? That's where you put it through the bracket. So you go all the way forward, get it through the bracket, and then once it's out, it's easier to get it unstrung from here. There's a little catch right here, like this little tab. So you string the cable out of the catch all the way around here until it's pointing out this way, and then you just slide it to the outside. Same thing with the other one. You just go around the catch. You can see the catch right here. Around the catch, and then string it up to here and then out. Once you've done all of that, then you can start tipping this up. Once your bolts are out, it'll tip back. Once you tip it back, there's a couple more sensors. There's one here that you can see that's red, and then there's another blade connector for the temperature switch for the temperature gauge. And then there's a white buckle one underneath of there. You want to undo that, and then there's 2 coolant lines you want to undo. There's one coolant line that comes out the back side of that. Can you see the clamp in the center of the frame? You get that one done, and then there's another one that goes straight down into the engine block, and you want to undo that one too. Once you've undone those, try to think if there's anything else. I think that's everything, and it should come out. So you just grab hold of this little cutie, manage your PCV hoses out of the way. You want to keep your PCV hoses clear of everything and mark them which one's driver and passenger side. Driver side's always the left side. Passenger side's always considered the right side. As if you're sitting in the vehicle, it's backwards for us mechanics. But that's just how it is. Anyway, that's the intake manifold. I'm shaking because it's heavy. I'll set it over here. Then I've got my air filter box. I've got all the bolts and everything. Everything's still in there, and all one piece. The wire harness goes pretty much together. So this is what we have. I'll go back and fetch that bracket for the engine hoist here in a minute, and I'll bolt it back on, or just stick a bolt in it. Now we rotate the motor. You get a 22mm socket, and then turn the motor over, and then extract all the bolts out of the flex plate for the motor, so that we leave the torque converter in there. If you pull the torque converter, it'll be murder getting it to line up again, and you risk damaging the front pump on the automatic transaxle. So that's where we're at. Let's do the bottom. Wow, I've already gone 10 minutes 40 seconds. This thing's going fast. It's kind of crazy, huh? So I got my flashlight. We're gonna go underneath. Next, you get your PB blaster, and you blast the 3 bolts on each side for the exhaust. Let them soak for a little bit, and then wire brush them. I like to use a drill with a wire brush end on it. The reason why I do that is the rust that builds up on these, as it inevitably does, will always make those nuts bind, and then it pulls the studs out of the head, and sometimes it damages them. Sometimes it pulls aluminum with them. So underneath you've got your lower radiator hose, which we would have pulled already when we pulled the radiator up and out. Oil drain, we already did that. Same thing over here. And then you want to swing over with the same socket and pull the nuts off of the motor mount. There's one on this side, and then I'll try to go slowly so I don't make everybody sick. There's another on this side. So you want to have those pulled, and then you want to creep underneath the driver's side and get that 17mm nut off the stud for the starter, and also the electrical connections and stuff, the signal wire for the starter, and then the power supply, the positive cable. So you get all of that undone, and then you come over here to this side, and then you see that little stud right there. That's one of the 4 that holds the engine in. That freaked me out. It's like making a creaking noise. I know the motor can't fall on me, but anything that moves, it just like, ah. So anyway, you get all that done, and see, here's what the plugs look like for the radiator. I'm stuck on the hose. Check out the new rims on the Creeper. Aren't those sweet? The other ones were driving me crazy. I hate hang-ups. I don't have a lift, so I gotta get by with a Creeper, so it better be nice. And it is. I like it. So it's like 80 bucks for the new wheels on it, though. Alright, back on task. The next thing I'm going to do is get that bracket and stick it back on. Trying to think of anything else. I mean, from here it's pretty cut and dry. You pretty much latch onto it with your cherry picker, and you want to pick the whole assembly up. It's got big long studs that go from the engine to the transmission. I'm going to get those bolts out, of course. So here's an example of what I was showing you earlier. See, I have 3 jack stands, 2 to support the vehicle by the unibody. The other one holds the transmission up, so I can clear the studs on the motor mounts. And then the radiator, the reason why I pull that out is, see how long those bottom 2 studs are? They're really long. In order to clear those and get the motor out, you're going to use the room where the radiator was, of course, for the flex plate to the torque converter. But you pick the engine up, and the engine and the transmission both go up like this, and that clears those studs on each side for the motor mounts. Once it's up like that, you put jack stands underneath the transmission so that it stays up at an angle, and then you pull it forward, and then it comes up and out the rest of the way. Hope this has been helpful to you. If it has, be sure to comment, rate it thumbs up, and subscribe if you'd like to learn more. Thanks.